Hi, I'm Peter Reinhardt, and welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread. I'm coming to you from the Hance Auditorium in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we've held the last 4 bread symposiums, and as you can see, there's nobody here but me. And this is where we usually have it. The seats are all empty because this year, thanks to you, the symposium will be presented online, virtually, in our new presentation hall, which is where I will join you in just a minute. Thank you, and thanks for being part of our new virtual Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. Welcome again. Throughout the entire symposium, I'll be thanking our generous sponsors over and over again, and ask that you do as well by visiting their booths and pavilions in the exhibitor hall. There you will see lots of bonus content, and you can also make appointments to meet with the folks from these companies that serve our baking community so well. Our presenting sponsor is Puratos, who has partnered with us from the very beginning for all of our symposiums, and it is their support that helped us get this one-of-a-kind gathering of thought leaders off the ground. Please also visit our fabulous flour and milling sponsors, Ardent Mills, Lindley Mills, and Central Milling. Thank you also to our equipment sponsors, the WP Bakery Group and Allied Bakery and Food Service Equipment. And thank you also to our specialty food product companies, Probiotine, Fire Within, Big Green Egg, and Mock Mill. Please check out all of their booths to learn about their wonderful and unique products. And also thanks to our media sponsors, Cook's Country, The Local Palate, the James Beard Foundation, and the Bread Bakers Guild of America. You'll be hearing more about all of them throughout the entire series of presentations. So again, thank you to all our sponsors. At the end of today's presentation, you will also see our credit scroll, thanking all of the people behind the scenes who made this event possible, including our production and technical partner, Ganoid Communications, our creative team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University, our hosts for this, our 4th annual gathering. So stick around, if you will. But now, it's time to get things rolling with today's presentation, so let's go live. And once again, welcome to the Johnson & Wales International Symposium on Bread, presented by Puratos. Yes, and here I am live, once again, in the same place, in my home office, about to introduce the end of our 4th week. Believe it or not, it's our 4th week into the symposium. For those who were just joining us or new to this whole process, and anything that you've already missed, be sure to check our archive section in the dashboard. You can see everything that you've missed, and everything will stay up on the dashboard for till the end of the year. Actually, we're going to keep this site alive till the end of the year. So even after the symposium ends, you'll be able to go back and see what you missed. And of course, as we go on, I know that not everybody's going to be able to make it to every presentation. Some of you can only make it, to the archived versions because of where you live. So we want to make sure that everyone has full access 24/7 to the recordings of all these presentations. Let me see, what else I want to tell you today. Reminder that next week, we will have Michael Gonsley on Monday. Michael is one of the world's foremost authorities on the science of the microbiology of sourdough starters. So it's going to be your chance, those of you who have questions about natural fermentation and the starters, the chemistry and microbiology of the starters, to get your questions answered and to hear about how environment affects the flavor profiles. So that's a big one. We've been looking forward to that as always. And then next Wednesday, which is always for us, Wednesday is demonstration day presentations of actual, bakers, as you'll see today with Nicky Giusto. But next Wednesday, we'll have Avery Rosica from Manresa Breads in it's below San Francisco in Los Gatos, California. And Avery's again a James Beard recognized award-winning baker, and she's going to show us next week how to transition from white flour recipes and turning them into whole grain versions. So that should be very interesting as well. And I don't know if there's any other notes to bring you up to date on. Remind you that those of you who have VIP tickets to stick around. Nicky is going to stay with us for an after party in the VIP lounge. You'll just need to move over to that lounge on the lobby and click on that to enter. And then at the end of this presentation today, which will include some questions and answers, you can please stick around for the credit scroll. Just again, thank yous to all the people behind the scenes. We'll leave some time at the end for your questions, but in the meantime, as we're going, if you think of a question you want to ask Nicky, I don't want to interrupt him during his presentation, but I'll collect them and I'll consolidate them, and I will feed those questions to Nicky after he finishes the presentation. And if there's anything that somebody wants to point out during the presentation that I need to jump in on, I will. So I'll be watching all of those. Use the Q&A function for that. Feel free to use the chat function to just communicate on the side, and I'll be watching those as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce a great baker, a great guy, a longtime friend of mine from the Giusto family, which, just full disclosure, that's where I used to get my flour, is from Nicky's uncle, Keith Giusto, when I had my bakery in Santa Rosa. And now new generations coming in, and Nicky has taken the baton and is doing all sorts of things with it, including winning international awards. Today he's going to make a focaccia, what I call the focaccia slab, which I first saw demonstrated at the Pizza Expo about 1.5 years ago, and I loved it so much that I'm including it in a new book that I'm writing. And I've asked Nicky if he would show us how he makes that amazing focaccia. So without further ado, again, I'm turning it over to you, Nicky. I'm going to go into mute mode and just watch. Nicky, you're on.
Live? Peter, thank you very much for that introduction. And hello, everybody. And before I get started, I want to thank my esteemed cameraman, Will, who's behind the camera, and Alex, who's going to be helping me out here too. He'll be bopping in and out of the scene. So thank you for that. And Gurmeet, thank you for all the help with the technical support and everything. So let's make some focaccia. So this is what we're going to be making right here. These are focaccia slabs, as Peter pointed out. They are made with sprouted grain. So we're going to be talking about a couple of things, some techniques with handling dough, mixing, and things like that. But most importantly, we're going to be talking about a little bit of sprouted grain. We're baking with a sprouted mash, which is a living sprouted grain, as opposed to a sprouted flour. And I'll explain the differences of that when we look at the ingredients. So this is essentially what the slabs are. It's a very, very functional bread. This for the International Pizza Expo, as Peter pointed out. Yeah, just looking for an easy way to produce a lot of pizza quickly. So the beauty of this is it's essentially a focaccia dough or a ciabatta dough in a lot of respects. That's processed similarly, stretched out into slabs, and then you can let that live in a speed rack for 30 minutes to 4 hours. And that's typically the bake cycle of the Pizza Expo. So we'll be pulling them out, topping them as we go, and baking them. So we'll watch that entire process now. I want to take a close-up. I want to take a look at some of the texture here that we have. So this is not quite 100% whole grain. We're using a 30% sprouted wheat and 70% type 80 flour. So it's a 100% whole milled flour that's been bolted or sifted down to an 80 ash. And it gives you a beautiful color, wonderful crumb structure. I happen to just slice this one thin because you can make sandwich with it, piadina, that sort of thing for service, individual service. Or you can top them in a manner like this, then cut them into slices as you will, and so on for service. So it's a very, very easy bread to make. Works well with all your standard baking equipment. So it's an easy thing to plug into your normal production cycle now. So let's talk about the formula a little bit. I'm going to walk over to our ingredients over here. So on our exhibitor site or exhibitor store or booth, virtual booth, you'll have this download. So it's basically the formula. It's not basically, it's exactly the formula that I'm using today and what I'm holding here. I don't have it in a super fancy, broken out how much fermented flour and that sort of thing. So it's more of a production formula, very basic. So the flour we're going to be using is our type 80 flour, like I mentioned before. Here, and once again, it's 100% whole milled organic blend of spring and winter wheats, milled 100% whole on a short flow mill and then bolted down to an 80 ash. I have our salt, 2% salt. I have instant yeast, instant red yeast I'm using here, and then malt extract, not diastatic malt. It's a non-diastatic malt that I'm going to be adding to this, basically a brewer's type of malt. Adds exceptional color and a nice punch of flavor. And of course, the star of the show is our sprouted wheat. So this, I have it broken down into the quantity that I'm going to be using for this formula, but this is the mash right here. It's a living mash. And if you can smell this, it smells very lactic. It comes to your bakery in a case like this. This is a 40-pound case, and there's 4 bricks of 10-pound units that have been flash frozen. And then you can thaw that out about 24 hours on the floor in your bakery, and it becomes perfectly pliable. This is a living dough. So it's going to offer quite a bit different texture than you would out of a dry flour. When that has been sprouted, dehydrated, and then milled into what would you typically use as a whole wheat flour. And sometimes that's sifted as well. Here, we're dealing with the entire kernel, no processing other than the halting of the sprouting process. So essentially what we do is we take and sprout the grain, get the leg out on it, and we're looking for a certain falling number. So once that falling number has been reached, we pause it by breaking up the grain and milling it down into a mash, and then freeze it as quickly as possible so we retain every ounce of the sweetness of that sprouted wheat. Then after that, once it arrives to your bakery, you can do all sorts of really cool stuff with it. You can thaw it out and use it straight into a straight dough, like a pan bread in a production facility. You can let it sit in your cooler for a couple of days and really start to ferment. You can leave it out a little bit. You can inoculate it, add a little bit of flour to it, and some sort of yeast source, whether it's instant yeast, to make a whole grain pouliche or stiffer biga, or of course you can inoculate it with a sourdough and make a levain, a stiff or liquid. You do all sorts of cool stuff with it because essentially it's dough. It's just grain. That's all it is, 100% whole grain. But it really imparts a unique color and flavor to the dough, as you saw on the slab. So Will's gonna follow me over here. I'm gonna start loading up the mixer and stop babbling so much. So I'm gonna start out by putting the sprouted grain, sprouted grain into the bowl. And then I'm gonna kick on the mixer a little bit just to break it up while I prepare the rest of the ingredients. Just get that going for a few minutes. So Alex was kind enough to scale me out some water and oil as well. So I have on the formula, we have a water 1 weight, and then we have a water 2, because it's a fairly wet dough. It's not super wet. We're not talking a liquid dough or a batter here, but it's manageable, but enough to provide enough highways for yeast to roll around and give you a nice airy texture to your dough, which is really nice. So I call this focaccia giusto because it's not quite focaccia. It's not quite pizza alla romana. It's not, it doesn't really fit in any certain little thing. It's a hybrid of everything I've learned about processing flatter doughs and just kind of combine them into something that worked for me. So that's why I call it Focaccia Giusto. It happens to be my last name. It's also just kind of a balance of all these different types of dough styles, which is really neat. Okay, so I just whizzed the sprouted grain around in the mixer a little bit, just to break it up. If it tends to be a little too frozen, you can do this trick on there and it'll break it up into a bit. So now I'm gonna add all our dry ingredients here. I'm gonna start with our flour. Malt in, salt, yeast. Of course, I'm holding back our oil and our water too. So we'll go in, start our mixture up. You can come around here a little. I'm just gonna start floating water in. Okay, so we're beginning. Nowadays, it's tough to find a mixer with a nice clear top on it so you can see what's going on. So I really appreciate this mixer for educational purposes. It's really nice. That. Okay, so typically if I know this formula like the back of my hand, so I can really just put all the water in. I know it's gonna take it, but I'm staging my water in here just to slowly incorporate what's going on. If we put it all in too fast, we'll wind up with a bit of a soup and it takes a little bit longer to come together. I don't know about you guys and all your bakeries there, but I love being in my bakery. I absolutely love it, but I don't want to spend the entire day here. So I try to find efficient ways to get on and off the mixer as quickly as possible. Okay. All right, so we're gonna go in speed one for, we typically go in speed one for 5 minutes, you know, to make sure that the protein of the flour is properly hydrated in order for it to develop the gluten as best as possible. But here I'm going a little bit longer. I'm gonna go up to about 8 minutes or so, and that's just to ensure, obviously, the protein in the type 80 has been fully hydrated. But also so we have even dispersal of the sprouted grain throughout the dough. Can you shorten it? Sure. But I've always found that it's safe just to run it at 8 minutes on speed one. But you can definitely, we'll take a look at it, it gets closer to the tail end of it. We could probably kick it on a little faster to speed two. And this is a smaller dough in this mixer, so it is going to take a little bit longer. So I will give it that extra time, I think. As we know, the more dough that we put in the mixer, the faster it's gonna process there. Okay. So when you're formulating with sprouted grain, with the mash, since it's a dough already, so how do you compensate for your salt and how do you formulate around it, especially when you're going with various different levels of sprouted grain throughout your experimenting maybe with a new formula? What I like to do is in my formula, I work in Excel, and what I do is I take the sprouted wheat amount and I multiply that by 65, because essentially we're dealing with 35% water. So it actually floats a little bit between 35 and 40% water. I always count for about 35. So then I'll base all my grain weight off of total flour plus 65% of the sprouted grain weight, which will be the actual grain weight. And then all my calculations for salt, oil, things like that are going to be super accurate, as accurate as they can be in this situation. It gets really tricky when you're dealing with 80 to 100% sprouted grain. There's some other handling tricks that you want to employ. But I believe that's a class for another symposium, maybe the next one. But when you're dealing with the lower amounts, 20, 30, 40, even up to 50% sprouted grain, you're mixing out, you're doing everything almost 100% like you do an average dough. There's nothing too new or too tricky about it, which is nice. Okay. All right, so we're mixing here. We're getting fairly well incorporated. Another few seconds here. I'm going to just give the bowl a little scrape, and I think we'll kick it on to speed 2 a little early. I wish a lot of you were in the room right now to ask me questions. I really appreciate the people. That's one thing I really miss about this symposium is interacting and rubbing elbows with everybody. And, it's difficult to do. As much as I love Alex and Will, you guys are great. But having more people around to elevate the excitement in the room as a spectacular dough is being mixed is kind of fun.
Well, Nicky, here's Peter here. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can.
Okay, so I'm the one person who can jump in and be in the room with you in a sense. And so I'll throw a question just in case people are thinking this is, what was the total hydration when you factor in the hydration in the sprouted mash plus the final dough? What is your hydration ratio against the flour?
I calculated at 75%. It's pretty low. It's pretty low. It's not super wet. It's definitely a little bit more soft than a baguette dough for sure, but it's only about 75% hydration.
And one other question.
More.
That helps to know. And then also you put the flour in, but we didn't get a chance to see that flour. You said it was 80. It was a type 80 flour.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Can you define what you mean by type 80?
So 80 is the ash level of the flour. Alex, would you mind taking a scoop out and slicking it on the corner so we can take a look? So 80 is the ash level. So we use the kind of the French measuring system as it pertains to the ash, you know, type 55, 65, 80, 85, 110, and so on. So the 80 is, the actual number is 0.8, and it's a calculation when we're running our lab work that says how much ash or non-carbon-based material is left in the flour. So it's the mineral content. If you're looking at flour and you see the specks in the flour, that's ash. And that's all the little bits of bran and germ that remain in the flour after the flour has been milled.
So in layman's terms, and if a home baker's watching and they can't buy it by type, what would be the closest thing at the store? Would it be bread flour, or would it be a high ratio flour, or high extraction flour, or what would you call it?
It'd be closer to it is a high extraction flour, yes. And the best way to approximate it is taking roughly 85% white flour and about 15% finely milled whole grain flour.
Oh, great. All right.
Close to this.
So they can make, basically they can make their own blend.
Exactly, exactly. There's not really one that's on the shelf that looks just like it. So Alex has put up a little pile here, and he's put a little slick in, so you can kind of see the ash content. I don't know if the camera is displaying it. Can you see that well enough, Peter?
Yes, I can see that. Yeah, and you can see that it's not pure. It's not pure white like a white flour would be. It's got specks.
Yes, and that's the beauty about this one, because it's milled 100% whole. So all the oils of the germ and the bran are smushed all around the endosperm, so it colors it. It enhances the pigment of it, and nice. Essentially the flavor as well. And it's typically what you see at any type of stone milling or most 100% whole milling operations that run a single or almost single pass type of flour. So conversely, if we were to make this on a long flow style flour mill, what you'd wind up with is a whiter looking flour with the specks in it. So there'll be a greater amount of contrast between the endosperm and the ash. That make sense?
Yes, to me.
All right, so we're just kicking up to speed 2 here. So you can see this dough is still a shaggy dough. We have a little bit of development going on, not much. So we're gonna start adding our water too. And then once we get all that in, we'll get our oil. And we'll be off to the races. Okay, so I have our water 2 weight, and I'm just gonna add it in stages. It's a lot easier when you have a lot more dough in the bowl. It absorbs it a bit quicker, but so I'm gonna add it. in slower stages. It's also known as double hydration. I like to refer to it as trickle hydration because you're almost trickling the water in rather than adding it all in one final dough.
From a technique standpoint, I didn't pick that up at the beginning. You didn't use all the water at the very front end. You held back some to add in during this second trickle effect.
Exactly. So with any wet dough, ciabatta, a super wet levain dough, any type of dough like that, when you have a higher amount of water in it, and this isn't super high, it's only 75%, but normally 80 plus, you always want to hold back some water for a couple of reasons. One, the main reason is so the dough develops a bit quicker, so you get the gluten development faster, and then you can get the rest of the water in there. Otherwise, we've all been on a mixer with too wet of a dough, I'm sure. Yeah. And you just end up pushing around soup for a while.
Takes forever. Gene, one of our viewers, asked, is this the same thing as bassonage?
Yes, of course, yes.
So bassonage would be a term, like a French term for this double hydration or trickle hydration approach.
Yes, and that's typically added after an autolyse. So you get just the flour, water in there, and then you can you add your salt, of course, your levain, or whatever pre-fermented dough you have, and then the second water. And I've broken that out on the formula sheet here, where I have our water 1, salt, yeast, malt extract, then our water 2, and then our olive oil.
And for those
for
those folks who didn't see my chat note on that, this formula will be available to you after this presentation. It'll live for the rest of the symposium at the Central Milling sponsor pavilion, and all you need to do is go to the pavilion and look in the PDF, handout section, and you'll find that formula, so you can print it out from there.
So take a look at this dough. So we're at a short mix here, just beyond a short mix. I mean, look at that sprouted grain floating around in there. We have some nice developments, nice and cloudy. So I'm gonna mix it a little bit more. We got a little bit more time. I'm gonna get our fat in. At this point. So things I'm looking for in the mixer, you can see how the dough is pulling around the breaker bar in a somewhat smooth manner. It's not super apparent on this mixer, but on a mixer that has more of an elongated spiral on it, like a WP Kemper mixer, where the spiral is elongated a little bit more, and it does a better job at picking up the dough. This one's a little bit more squat, so it slices through the dough, so it's not as efficient as like a WP or any of the German style mixers I found have a nicer, a quicker mix out.
You mentioned autolyse as you were talking about this. Would an autolyse be an appropriate technique to use for this particular dough?
It can, but I don't think it's necessary, honestly, because 30% of the grain weight they're using in the formulation is already, fully hydrated. So I think that longer incorporation time and making sure that the protein is properly hydrated and in speed 1 is enough. If it was 100% dry flour, I'd definitely say that an autolyse would help extensibility. But we're also going to go overnight with this dough. So we're not really depending on any, or we're not needing any extensibility right off of the bat. It's going to have all night to relax in the cooler. And with this higher hydration, as you'll see when we start pushing out the dough, it'll be really easy to handle. So I should probably talk about how we're going to be fermenting this. So this is, as you saw, pretty much a straight dough, right? There is some fermentation going on in the sprouted wheat. Of course, we have our yeast amounts in there, but I didn't add any levain or pouliche or anything like that in there, which you can if you want to bump up the flavor even more. But with this very basic formula, I like to just keep it straight. So we'll come off of the mixer here, and then we'll bulk ferment for 1 hour. And then after that hour, what we're going to do is I'm going to give it a fold. and then go into the cooler, 40-degree cooler, or roughly go a little bit warmer too, like 4 degrees Celsius. And then overnight for 18 to 20 hours. It's super flexible. You can even go a little bit longer than that too. It really depends on the strength of your flour. If you're using a lower protein flour as your base, in this case for the type 80, say you're at a 11%, 11.5 protein flour, you're going to have a bit more fragile dough. Our type 80 is a little on the stronger side. It'll definitely has a good amount of strength to it. So you have a lot more fermentation tolerance to get you easily to that 20, 24. You can even go 2 days if you really want to. Okay, so take a look at this dough here. It's nice and soft. It definitely looks more hydrated than a 75% hydration dough, doesn't it, Peter? Doesn't it look pretty slack?
I was weird. Yeah, it does. It looks like a ciabatta dough almost.
Yeah. So nice and soft. I mean, this is like a pillow in here. I mean, look at that.
I love all that texture in there.
So I break my finger through there and I see the edges. I mean, besides the grain part, but the edges are fairly smooth. So that's when I know we're about ready to yank. Alex, got that oil tub? Oh. So if I were doing a bigger batch, I would divide this into roughly 9 kilo batches per US size bus tub. You can easily, in a European style bus tub, dough tub, 8 to 9 kilos is also a good weight to put in there.
Joe mentioned, he brought up the question about how the Germans typically will use the dough temperature range to help them determine when the mixing process is complete. Do you usually check for dough temperature, and do you have an ideal desired dough temperature?
I sure do, and I'll check it after this. So I was aiming for 75. That's always the goal here for this particular dough. We use 60-degree water, and obviously did the calculation based on our room temperature and the temperature. We have a little slightly cooler sprouted grain because that's coming out of the refrigerator, and of course bakery temperature flour and all the other ingredients. So I calculated about 60-degree water, so we should be really close to our 75-degree. Just gonna yank this all out of the mixer, just like that. Give my hands a little rinse and check our thermometer and pray. Come on. Oh, we're a little on the cool side. But that's okay.
So that would mean you're like 72 degrees. So maybe you'd have to add a little extra fermentation time in the bulk.
Yeah, I mean, but we're talking 2 degrees, especially if you're dealing with larger dough batches. I mean, it's going to heat up just by sitting there. So a couple of degrees I'm not too worried about. So in the formula, I used to have 72 to 76 in there as the range, but I just popped 75 in there. I wouldn't stress about that at all.
If you needed for any reason to try to get it closer to that desired dough temperature, can you mix it longer to create more friction and raise it without damaging the dough?
You definitely could, yes. And you want to be really careful with that, especially when you're dealing with lower protein flour, because you're obviously in fear of over mixing at that point. And we're really shooting for a just beyond short improved mix. We're not going improved plus here. We're looking for just a nice improved mix. And if you need that extra heat generation, then do it. You'll be fine. Alternatively, if you got a proof box in your bakery, you can just crank that up to about 75 to 80 and then dump it in there for that hour-long floor proof, or just find a warm spot for it. But you get so much fermentation action in the cooler that I wouldn't stress about it. Okay, so we're gonna let this sit for an hour. We're obviously not gonna be here for an hour. We're going Food Network style here. So this is what the dough looks like here.
That's after the overnight?
Yes. This is after the overnight. So this was at 1 hour on the floor. And then this is 22 hours in the cooler right now. So this is 22 hours. And look how alive and gassy this is. Isn't that nice? Whoa.
Oh.
Well, looks like Jabba the Hutt, doesn't it?
Live.
Okay, so we're gonna process this in just 1 second. But I want to show you, because our bake time and our short little time here, what this is, that we're actually going to dump some in the oven now, and while it's baking, I'll process and cut the dough. So essentially what we're looking to do is we're going to cut that dough bulk, and we're going to lay it out onto parchment in slabs like this. So in this state, we're good for a minimum of 30 minutes up to about 4 hours or so when it starts to gas out. If you need a little bit more, you can dial down that yeast a little bit, or pull a little water out, or control your temperature a little bit, and so on. So you can fill up this entire speed rack, and so you got a service and you want to bake these babies fresh, you just yank them and pull them throughout your lunch service or dinner service or so on. And I found like 4 or 5 hours is a good window to have this dough sitting there. It's kind of like the pizza technique, but we're not par baking, but you definitely can do this in this situation as well. So this is how we're going to process it. After it's been processed and sit, you can go ahead and top them a number of ways, however you want. We're going to go some in blind with just some olive oil and a little salt. We have some with some just sliced onion, olive oil, and black pepper. And then some with just some red sauce and some oregano on it. So we're going to slide these into the oven now, and then I'm going to get to cutting this other dough. So this is the beauty about this technique is you got a deep oven or a little oven, you don't need to tie up a loader or a peel. You're just right on your proofing boards, your bagel boards, and you go.
So you actually slid it, parchment and all, into the oven. So the parchment really provided the lubrication, so to speak, to get it off the board.
Correct. Yeah. And it makes it just no stress, no nothing. I mean, we do have a little bit of paper waste on here. I'm using as natural parchment paper as I can get my hands on. Sure. This nice natural brown stuff. If I had the white parchment paper or anything with what's the bad stuff in it? Is it chrome?
Silicone or?
Yeah, I just kind of, I don't think I would do that. I would try to get it off on a peel. But the problem is,
did you have to grease that parchment or mist it with anything?
Just a little bit of flour. So let me show you how I load up the bread onto the boards now.
You know, this reminds me so much of something I saw in Rome at the Antico Forno, which are these long pizza slabs like what you're making, where they're about 7 feet long. And it almost looks like in a totally different formula than theirs, but the same style, so to speak.
Yeah, it's really just a mini version of that, essentially. Because I'm typically baking in these shorter ovens, and I don't have that length to get that nice long Roman style dough, that 6 and 8 footers.
And in a home oven, people can do it. They just shorten it to fit to their baking stone.
Definitely, yes. So yeah, in any type of electric deck ovens like these LCs, Casasanta ovens, or the WP Matadors, which are also excellent ovens. We have a couple of those, and these type of doughs work perfectly in these type of situations. So take a look at this. Come on in. I mean, look at this fermentation out of here. You can see all the little bits of the sprouted grain. It's hard to tell through here, but I mean, this is a nice slack dough. Just gonna give a little bit of anti-stick there. So now I'm gonna do is sheet this out. Like this. Or as square as possible. So I'm not degassing it a ton, okay? So I'm just trying to get it a nice flat rectangle. And with a dough that is this wet, this slack, it's so much easier to work with it when it's cold. If it was, room temperature, it'd definitely be a lot stickier. I'd have to use a lot more flour. And as a person representing a flour mill, that's not normally a bad thing. But in this case, I'm trying to save some money and, obviously work in a cleaner environment, right? So this dough right here is just under 9 kilos. This one will yield about 12 slabs, like the ones I just dumped in the oven there. We're talking 12 slabs that are roughly about 700 grams, give or take. So we're going to cut this ciabatta style, so we're not too worried about the weight. It's more about just the yield. So I like to use a scraper, since I know I'm getting 12, so I'm going to do 6 lanes and then cut in half as I go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, close enough for government work, right? So now, you just grab a board. Here's our friend, the parchment. I just put a little bit of flour on here. And I cut in half again, just generous amounts. And then here, I'm handling it just like you do with a focaccia. So this is kind of where the focaccia bit comes in. So you can dump these slabs on the parchment like I'm doing here, or you can also dump it in a pan too, like a blue steel pan. I'm sure you've heard of Gabriele Bonci in Italy, Pizzerium, super popular place. And actually he was a huge bit of inspiration for this dough when I went and saw him. So you would put this in an unoiled pan. You could, of course, you could use oil if you'd like, a little bit of olive oil. But just running it straight into the pan will give you a slightly, I think it gives you a crisper dough for reheating purposes. So again, I'm pushing out focaccia style. I'm giving it a stretch, and you can see, hopefully through the camera here, how extensible this dough is. So it's very relaxed, very easy to handle. Of course, the main production trick would be to have a stack of this stuff already done, but that. Okay. So again, this is all I'm doing, dimpling with the fingers. And then when I go into the oven, I'm gonna do this, oops, sorry. I'm gonna dimple it one more time, but when I do the topping. So I'll start topping it with the onion or the red sauce or just oil, and then dimple it again, just like I'm doing here, just go through it focaccia style.
How much floor time before you start to top it and bake it?
You can go 30 minutes up to 4 hours. But what you can do too, if you already have your toppings, if it's a known situation, you can just go ahead and top them like I did with these ones, where I put the toppings on about 40 minutes ago or so. So they're sitting in the speed rack already topped and ready to go, or at least with the base sauce on them. And what we'll do is we'll take these out and we'll add a little fresh toppings on top of it afterwards. So you can mix hot topping and of course fresh toppings.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to speak to the viewers for a second. As we're coming closer to the Q&A portion of our presentation, if you have any questions, I've been trying to throw yours in as you've sent them, which I appreciate. Some great questions that came through already. If you have any that I haven't asked on your behalf, start typing them in the Q&A, and I'll gather them and start to feed them to Nicky. Because I think our Q&A today, it looks like it'll be a working Q&A. They'll be continuing to finish these off as we keep feeding them with questions.
I love working with questions, so don't be shy.
It does make it feel more natural, doesn't it?
It really does.
Talking to a camera, yeah.
Yeah, working silently is appreciated. You know, us bakery workers, we do like to, have our sanctuary and our quiet time in the bakery. But sometimes it's a lot of fun to talk. Yes, I wish you were all here to touch this dough because it feels so nice. It's almost addictive, you know, when you're dealing with a soft dough. It's not just this dough. Any soft dough is so fun to handle.
You know, I was thinking the same thing as you were working it. I was thinking how beautiful it looks and how great it must feel.
And what's nice about it is that you can tuck it into any shape. If you wanted to do different shapes other than the slab, I mean, you can. You cut rings, line circle pans with it. You can.
Have you ever tried going right into the oven without any floor time to see what happens, what kind of oven spring you get when it goes right from where it is right now? Yeah.
Let's dump one in.
I'm curious because I've seen, you know, some techniques where it just goes right to the oven without any rise on, and all the structural stuff happens, you know, in the oven.
So that's the one I just put in there. We'll do two, or the one I just pushed out is the second one.
So this will be a little bonus test here.
And really, when you're in the weeds, I mean, you can really pound through this stuff quick, especially if you have two people working on the bench. I mean, you can easily fill up a couple of these speed racks, no problem, in about a half hour labor time. And then you have all your stuff pushed out, ready to roll for production. And it's also a good dough just to add to your daily menu too. So after you do your morning bake, or mid-morning bake, you just have a bunch of this stuff lined up, ready to go. People come in, buy a miche or four, and then grab a slice of this stuff, a slab of it, fold it over, wrap it.
So I just got a note from some people saying that they're having trouble seeing the whole picture. Let me just mention, if you're not in speaker view, make sure you put your Zoom into speaker view instead of group view or whatever. That will help give you a full screen of Nicky, or someone else lost the picture and got it back by closing out chat. But try a couple of things. You should be able to get the full view of Nicky if you go full screen in speaker view.
How are we looking in there, Alex? How's that oven looking?
We have 3 more minutes for the first one.
Want to take the camera over there and show what's going on? Good thing I cleaned the glass, huh, Peter?
I like that, yeah. I'm sure that prior to today, it wasn't quite so translucent, huh?
It does get a film on it.
Hey, while you're doing that, a couple more questions have come in. What if you don't do an overnight bulk fermentation? This is from Juan. Don't do a bulk fermentation, but instead just do it at same day at room temperature. Can you get comparable results?
You definitely can, but in this case, what I would do is add a levain or a pouliche to it. I'll get some pre-fermented dough in there and run it at somewhere around 50% to your final weight. And definitely do that. And in that case, you can do the same day, mix, shape, and bake, no problem.
That's a good question. Good point. So you're getting some pre-fermented flavor in there through your pre-ferment or your levain. And then another question: how long does the sprouted mash last? Once you've got the mash itself, and let's say you're keeping it in the refrigerator, how long will it be viable without maybe, I guess, over fermenting in the fridge?
I like to draw the line at 2 weeks, and I think that's a little long, but good Lord, I mean, the flavor, the milkiness of it, it's really, it tends to break down a lot, so it's not as functional of an ingredient at that point as far as bakery production goes, or dough production, but the flavor and the breakdown of the enzymes, available sugars, all that stuff is going to be just off the charts. One thing to keep in mind, though, and a lot of people say this, and we know this is definitely known things, all things oxidize. So this stuff in the cooler, the sprouted mash will start to oxidize after a few days. And basically just the top layer the bran starts to darken a bit. It mixes out. So don't be afraid of that at all. It doesn't look as attractive as it does when it's like fresh, but there's nothing wrong with it at all.
Not ruined, yeah. And there's a couple more questions coming in. I'm gonna take some from the bottom up. Did you happen to say how long it stays in the oven and at what temperature?
We're at 14 minutes in the oven, and I'm baking around 500 degrees.
Okay, so typically about a 14-minute bake is all it takes at 500?
Yep.
Okay.
And you can go a little bit longer depending on the color. If you're adding more sweetener to the dough, a liquid sweetener, honey or agave, maple syrup, you could add all sorts of stuff to it. And that'll obviously shorten or lengthen your time depending on how much sweetener you have in there. But just with the malt extract or even diastatic malt, you'll be hovering around a 14-minute bake, given this level of water in it. If you want to push the water a little bit more, I'd open the damper or open the door or elongate that bake a little bit just so you bake out a little bit more water. Otherwise, it'll be more of a soggy dough.
Yeah, you got to get the moisture out. Somebody wants to know, what if they don't have access to sprouted grain, can they make it with sprouted flour?
Yes, yeah, you can do something similar. What you want to do is work with a coarser granulation, something like a medium granulation or a coarse granulation to achieve this same level of texture. So you have the visual. But if it's a fine granulation, you'll have more of a uniform color throughout the dough. It'll be more obviously of a solid brown color. And the neat part about this dough is just the those are stuff that we looked at the beginning.
Oh, it's right in the back.
Okay. I'll show it to you again. It's the textural difference, the contrast in the crumb, the visual interest is super nice. When you're dealing with some of the coarser granulations with the finer granulation of the other flour that you're adding in there. That makes sense?
Yeah, and again, I would think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that if you had the fine grind sprouted flour, you could always probably sprinkle in some wheat bran or something textural, coarse ground whole wheat flour, something else to give it some of that texture.
I mean, you can use wheat germ, you can add bran, I mean, anything.
Maybe even cooked grain, possibly.
What's that?
Even cooked grain, like quinoa.
Yes, yeah, you can do a porridge, any type of cooked grain.
Oh, man.
Again, just so you can see the texture that's in here. You can see the outer bran layers around my super floury thumb. I'm sorry about that. But the color is just beautiful.
It is. It's awesome. That's part of when I saw it for the first time at the Pizza Expo, I just fell in love with the structure and that beautiful color. And so just to reiterate, you used non-diastatic malt, kind of like beer making malt, for flavor, more for flavor than for enzyme action. But also, because you were using a living sprouted mash, isn't there a lot of enzyme? I mean, that's malted flour right there. Isn't there a lot of enzyme activity as a result of using the mash?
Oh, there sure is. I mean, because when you're sprouting the grain, you're basically turning the complex carbohydrate of the endosperm into a simple sugar, right? So it's just making a plant. So the endosperm is the food the germ starts to eat, and then it does that conversion, and then it lowers the amount of phytic acid that's in the wheat kernel, which makes all the nutrients in the germ bioavailable for your body to absorb. Because when you have too much phytic acid in your stomach, it's like acts like a shield, to that wraps around all your nutrients and says, no, don't absorb me. I'm going to go out the exit. So this way it's broken down. So those nutrients, the B vitamins, the riboflavin, the thiamine, all those things get absorbed in your body. Sprouting is a great way to make the best use of the kernel of wheat. But you can also do this with fermentation too. Any sort of long fermentation dough is going to give you similar results. But the sprouting gives you that sweetness, that extra amylase that's produced during that sprouting process is really nice.
Well, I don't want to break your workflow there, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to keep asking some of these questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anything we don't get to cover. I know not everybody who's watching will be joining us in the VIP after party, but I'll try to get to them. If not now, we'll do them then. Sources. So we know that Central Milling makes sprouted grain pulp mash available. That's one. Are there other sources for this for people for home cooks who aren't working in like large scales like bakeries?
No,
Should
I
they
don't know
make their
anybody
own?
else who's
Should they
making
sprout
that.
their own?
Yeah, sprouting your own is the way to do it. It's labor intensive, but it's a rewarding process, and it's really not. It's not rocket science.
And you basically take the sprouted grain and run it through a meat grinder or something, don't you? Or something comparable.
Exactly. So from beginning to end, what we do is we take our grain and we soak it. First, we rinse it quite a few times, and then we soak it, pull the water off, let it sprout, and then once we hit our magic falling number that we look for, it's kind of our secret sauce. We run that through our grain mill, which is essentially a customized meat grinder designed specifically for this purpose.
Yeah.
And then we compress it into these bricks, like you saw at the beginning, those 10-pound bricks. And then we flash freeze those to lock it all in, and then package it up, and then keep it frozen until it hits your bakery.
Can a home baker buy a small slab of that from you?
Unfortunately not. That's it's one of the problems, because the freight, because we need to overnight it. I mean, if the baker really wants to spend that amount of money on the freight, then I mean, I don't want to stop them, but I do think it's a bit of a waste. But like if you're dealing with a 40-pound case and you're local to our mill in Logan or our shop in California in Petaluma, we can definitely accommodate some sort of pickup service or even delivery at that point.
I'll let you keep working. And I see one more question has come in. Yeah, he did. Your baking time, you said, was about 14 minutes. I'm answering more questions that are coming in. Is there a falling number? Did you speak anything about a falling number in your flour? Is that an issue for you when you're making these?
Falling number in flour is a huge issue, and that speaks to consistency of the enzymatic activity inside the flour. So we monitor our falling numbers, and every mill does, really very closely, especially when we're malting our flours off the mill as well. So it's definitely something that we keep a very close eye on.
And we don't have time really to explain that for those of you who don't know what that is, but that's an important milling concept. We'll maybe come back to that in the after party. Dan asks, can you arrive at a type 80 type flour by bolting a whole grain flour or sifting it to like 20% of the weight of the flour?
No, it's a bit different. I'm sorry, I'll answer that just quick in a second. You see how I took the dough off the rack and I pushed it down again, or I added some toppings and then pushed it down. So that's all the treatment that I'm doing. So after we bake, we'll put on some other toppings and so on. So I just wanted to show you that step.
You can top before and after.
What's that?
You can put toppings on before and after.
Yes. So as far as the bolting goes, yes. So this flour is made by milling 100% whole flour and then sifting off. The problem is if you do it by weight, you're really paying attention to what would be the extraction number. So if you have, say, 100 pounds of grain, and you mill that down into 100% whole wheat flour, so you have 100 pounds of whole wheat flour, and then you sift off 20 pounds of that, of the outer layers bran, you'll wind up with obviously 20% bran, 80% of this flour. And a lot of people call that a type 80, or they would think it is, but it's not at all. If you were to measure the ash in that flour, it would be much higher than that. So the ash level would be higher. And that's really because of the size of the kernels are different. If you were to mill heavy spring wheat, where you're talking about 63, 64 test weight, very plump berry, and then sift off 20 pounds, versus a lower protein, or excuse me, a high protein winter wheat, which is really scrawny, like a 58 test weight, and then mill that and then sift off 20 pounds. The lower protein one, the smaller berry, will be a much darker flour, which means the ash level will be much higher than if you were to look at the ash level of the more plump berry that was really big. And then we sifted that down. So when you can't do it by that weight method. It just doesn't work.
Okay. For
consistency's sake, because that one, it's not accurate to the actual ash level. You're just talking extraction at that point. and it'll be inconsistent from every time you mill. If you have a slightly change your berry, every time you sift off that 20 pounds, your finished flour is going to be different looking.
So, well, theoretically, you could use that flour. You can't count on it being consistent from batch to batch. If I'm hearing
you can't, no. And rating it by ash or measuring the ash is the way to make it consistent for ash.
And that's why we need millers. That's why we need the mills, because most of us don't know how to do all those things. But
yes.
But this is what I'm going to suggest. Our hours flown by, and I know you still have some things to show us. I'm going to give you a minute or two to kind of just do a couple final things, and then we'll take a break, and we'll reconvene in the VIP lounge. For those of you who don't have a VIP ticket but would like to, get one, it's a very inexpensive upgrade to the VIP ticket. Just immediately write to just take the email question@breadsymposium.com, or use the support button on the site and ask our team how to upgrade to a VIP so you can join us in the lounge. But most of the folks who are here now might already be planning to come. So you're finishing up. What kind of cheese are you putting on top?
This is just a low moisture mozzarella, and I like it fresh. The bake is just too long for mozzarella to stand up. It's 14 minutes.
Yeah.
To be dry.
Yeah.
So I like to put it on fresh in this situation, or you can dump it back in the oven, like a par bake style,
just to melt
and
it a little.
Finish it off if you wanted to melt it off. Yeah.
It's kind of nice. It's kind of like cheese curds right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's some finishing steps. You can add other herbs to it. I mean, pizza is pizza. I mean, let your creativity fly on it. Whatever you have to put it on there. Stuff on dough is pizza, right? This is just what I happen to have in the bakery. Okay.
All right. Those are beautiful. Let's end this segment. If you wouldn't mind, show us that crumb again, because I think that's the money shot right there. This is our target. This is the goal, is to come up with something that is this gorgeous. Look at that, with oil and nothing else. Is this the one that went in without being fermented first, without a proofing time?
No, that would be this one. So see the difference? So we have a bit more gassing going on. That time to rest.
Yeah.
Is definitely important. So this is the one that we had sitting out for roughly about an hour. So that's just an hour, and this was no time, and it's pushed out. So I think that relaxing step is really important if you're going to be topping it, because it gives you a lot of nooks and crannies for all your toppings to live in. If you're just doing sandwiches,
that could work really good. Then you could use that as a panini type bread.
Well, this baby's hot, like it just came out of an oven.
So that's also going to be unfair to the crumb because it's still setting up. But let's see.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a little gooey in there.
Still moist and gummy, but look, it's still lots of open. I mean, it really did pop in the oven. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and I just ripped it all to shreds there. But I mean, like if you look at,
and yet it will still be delicious. But there's the beauty shot there. Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up now. Okay. We'll call this session, coming to a close. Those of you who are watching, please stay on screen for another minute and just watch the credits roll, and then come back in. We'll take a 5-minute break to give Nicky a chance to kind of just get himself ready, and you can keep baking or do what you need to do, and we'll rejoin. You and I'll log back in on the links that we have for the VIP lounge, and everybody else, please join us there if you can. If not, if you're not going to join us there, join us next Monday. So everything's microbiology. Next Wednesday, Avery Ruzicka. Nicky, this has been fabulous. This is fantastic. And I love, not just how beautiful that bread is, but the way you've incorporated the sprouted grains in there, which I think, how much of an advocate I am about sprouted grains. I think it's really, we talk about the future of bread. And I think that you can't talk about the future of bread without really grasping and embracing the whole idea of sprouted grains as being a big part of that.
And thank you very much for Peter for inviting me to do this. And thanks for everybody that's watching for sitting through me babble for an hour. Really appreciate that.
You did a great
job. If you have any questions,
I'm
always around to answer them. So I'm here for you to help elevate the quality of bread across the world as much as I can anyway.
Fantastic. Well, folks, we'll see you in 5 minutes. And those who are coming back, we'll see you in 5 minutes, Nicky. And again, thank you very much. Go ahead and roll the credits.
Thank you.
Thank you to our team behind the scenes. Our event, technical and production partners, Ganoid Communications, including our producer, Gurmit Singh, and his team, Jida Gajaria, Gagandeep Singh, and Jaydev Kashari. Thanks also to Ted Nelson and Lael Fretzel of our creative and marketing team at Gumbo Marketing, and the many folks at Johnson & Wales University who supported me throughout this event. My executive assistant, Sarah Standifer, Communications Director, Melinda Law, Chancellor, Mim Rooney, Charlotte Campus President, Cheryl Richards, and our executive team leaders, deans and faculty, Maureen Dumas, Michael Schrader, Michelle Nicholas, Mark Norman, Brent Steyerwalt, Laurie Heimbach, Jerry Lanuza, Amy Felder, Harry Paymiller, Richard Miskovich, and many, many others. Thank you all.